Hello everybody, you have tuned in to Eric Jose on Making a Murderer on YouTube. I cover virtually any aspect of making a murderer. I go over the evidence, the documents, the photos. So if you like, stay tuned, and in the future I'll have many more videos besides the one you're about to see. Hello everybody, how you doing? We are here today to talk about the state's brief in response to Brendan's writ for certiorari, right? Sorry it took me a couple days, folks. I've been busy lately. Just so busy, it's ridiculous. With work and stuff and some personal projects and things that are going on at home for me and stuff. So, like, in my personal life and work, I've been very busy. So it's been, you know, tough for me to juggle things. I'm so sorry, Georgina. Anyways. So to move on to what we're talking about today, we're talking about the state's filing now in response to Brendan's writ for certiorari with the Supreme Court. And I read the brief now. I've fully read it. I initially saw Jerry Buting's response, or basically his tweet, where he was, you know, summing up what he felt it was saying, you know. So and I think he's about right, you know. He seems to have gotten it pretty correct. The state is basically, as any of us would have expected, they're standing on AEDPA. You know, they're basically just, you know, using that as the reason why this is all just not invalid, essentially. Even though twice Brendan was granted his writ of habeas corpus, the state just believes there's no merit here and that sort of thing. So but the interesting part is that when you get to the end, and you'll see at the very end of this video, when you get to the end, the state starts to suggest, you know, that even if these methods were coercive that were used on Brendan with you know, as social science and things are showing, as DNA exonerations are showing, but they don't mention those, but those are also teaching us. There's a lot of things they don't mention, trust me, but they mention that these things are teaching us and whatever, basically that the Supreme Court may want to address the future of juvenile interrogations as a whole across the country, but that this case isn't a good vehicle for it. So it's basically what the state is basically doing is either Brendan screwed because of AEDPA, whether he's innocent or not, or Brendan should be screwed because if you are going to make law on this, you shouldn't do it with this case because it's a habeas case and bound by AEDPA. And so they're making these arguments, but what comes through really for me is basically we want one of these two things, because these two things keep Brendan locked up, so we don't have to fess up and we don't have to own our, you know, our mistake, essentially. The Wisconsin won't have to own this mistake where we did coerce a 16-year-old kid. We may have been completely, you know, we may believe that it was for the greater good, but we may have done that, but we don't want to own that. That's what it says to me. That's what this brief says to me as I read it. So we'll go ahead and move on into some of the first bits of it here. The first bit we're going to see here is basically the question that's at stake, you know, or the question that's being raised in the mind of the state, and then we'll go into the first segment of some of the what the state feels was going on here. So here we go. Okay, so the state starts out with question presented: whether the Seventh Circuit Court committed error when it held that the Wisconsin Court of Appeals reasonably applied this court's clearly established law in holding that the 3-hour non-custodial questioning of a 16-year-old Mirandized suspect using only standard techniques was not unconstitutionally coercive. Well, you know, we've had lots of talks about that, but we'll go into, you know, kind of refuting what the state has to say as they go on in their argument here. But that's basically the opening, you know, of course, what is trying to be established here in terms of the state and what the question at stake is. Okay, so just to quickly kind of show you a little bit more kind of what Brendan's up against here is there was a recent tweet from Governor Scott Walker there in Wisconsin. Governor Scott Walker has not been in any way sympathetic or proactive in terms of what happened with Stephen or Brendan. Either one. He has basically seemed to have been of the opinion that they are guilty, they're where they belong, whatever. Well, with Brendan, obviously, his case is getting a lot of attention. And the conversation right now about juveniles and juvenile interrogations and what juveniles, you know, experience when having to deal with law enforcement or have encounters with law enforcement, and what you know, pitfalls lie there for investigators, and what, you know, things have been happening that really need to be addressed and stuff. It's the awareness for the mental health of juveniles week or month, something like that. You'll see here, I'm going to put the screenshot up. And he's like basically trying to act as though he cares about the mental health and everything with juveniles. Yet we see that with Brendan Dassey, he has never even bothered to give it a fair consideration, because when you look at that opinion, as the state points out at one point in this brief, the state points out that even Judge Hamilton said that he had some problems and some issues with this case, but it wasn't enough to overcome AEDPA, is essentially what Judge Hamilton said. But even Judge Hamilton obviously, you know, acquiesced somewhat to the fact that this interrogation is problematic, right? We can't even get that from Governor Walker, yet he wants to post this tweet you're going to see here, almost as though he's trying to give people the illusion that he really does care about those sort of things, and maybe like he's trying to draw attention away from the whole, you know, kind of embarrassing, you know, nature of what MAM has exposed, and he has continued to keep his head in the sand when it comes to it, or, you know, or act like the issues are irrelevant or whatever. And then you see him make a tweet like this. You know, it's, to me, he just comes off as trying to tell people, I'm a good guy, I care about juveniles, but not that one. Essentially, is the way it comes off, in my opinion. So I'll show you the tweet from Governor Walker. Governor Walker declared it Children's Mental Health Awareness Day throughout the state, addressing the complex mental health needs of children, youth, and the families is fundamental in the future of Wisconsin. Your finest example of addressing a child's complex mental health needs was when the state gave a 40-year prison sentence to a 16-year-old child with learning difficulties. How fitting is it on this very day the state's Justice Department follows your example of awareness by urging SCOTUS to keep this innocent person in prison. And there we have Brendan Dassey. Obviously, that is a link to an article in the Post-Crescent about the state's filing with SCOTUS, with the Supreme Court of the United States. So, thought I'd show you all that. Okay, so this next part is going to be kind of a little bit longer, but it's going to be a lot of the state's explanation of why Brendan's interrogation was actually good, and why, and what information was gained from it that actually proves that Brendan Dassey was there and was part of this and all that. So it's going to be you know, a few minutes here, but I think seeing all of this so that everybody can see the way the state is still choosing to look at this and point out, I mean, just pointing out here the things that are just so wacky with what the state believes. I mean, they're trying to say that Brendan, you know, was saying that he was being asked these open-ended questions, and that he was offering these very damning facts, such as she screamed in the trailer, she was in the trailer bleeding, she was handcuffed to the bed, she was all these things, right? There is no proof of any of those things. So how is that damning to him? That just proves his confession isn't corroborated. It proves nothing to make it more valid. You need to actually find some proof of those things first. But the state goes on as if those things are proven. Strange. So anyways, we'll move into that right now. 2 days later, on March 1st, 2006, investigators conducted another interview, during which petitioner unexpectedly confessed to raping, killing, and mutilating the victim. Unexpectedly, when the facts were being fed to him? Anyway, investigators obtained permission to talk to petitioner again from both him and his mother, and then drove the petitioner to the police station. Actually, the permission from his mother was with the express caveat, or, condition, that as long as he got back to school, which never happened. So, I don't know exactly that permission was given when they didn't respect it, when they didn't get him back to school. They arrested him. They again read Miranda warnings, even though, as the parties have stipulated, the petitioner was not in custody. They questioned him in a soft room and offered food, drinks, restroom breaks, and opportunities to rest. They spoke in measured tones, never raised their voices, did not threaten, and did not use intimidating or coercive language. Now, I would disagree. They repeatedly intimidated him with these so-called measured tones, and saying, tell the truth, and what they call assurances and stuff like that. But the thing is, those things were intimidating and coercing Brendan, and he was reacting to them. He felt, it's pretty clear in the interviews that Brendan felt like every time they asked him to be honest, that he knew that they were accusing him of lying. He would react, in a way that he would usually end up spitting out another guess that he hoped would be closer to what they wanted. You can see this happening in the interrogation, which is another thing that adds to the whole fact here, is how much care did the district or the appellate court put into the fact finding on this confession, because it seems like pretty much none. Everything is fed to him, Anyway, so instead, investigators use common techniques such as urging petitioner to tell the truth, speaking in sympathetic tone to achieve a rapport, bluffing about what they knew, and occasionally asking leading questions to confront the petitioner with what they knew. They made no specific promises of leniency, while they rephrased a common maxim saying that honesty is the only thing that will set you free. They had just explained to the petitioner that we can't make you any promises. Petitioner showed no signs of physical distress throughout. The petitioner volunteered many of the most damning details in response to open-ended questions. Now, that's interesting. Damning details. Okay, let's go on. What he saw, what he heard, and even what he smelled. Petitioner initially told investigators that his uncle called him between 6 and 7 o'clock to ask for help on his car. Investigators pointed out that this account was inconsistent with what they knew and what petitioner had told them 2 days earlier, and encouraged him to get the truth out. Petitioner then revised his story, stating that his uncle came to his house and asked for help with something, but then showed him the victim's dead body in the back of her car, explained that he had raped her, the first mention of rape during the interview, but not the first time rape was mentioned in interviews with Brendan. Rape was mentioned in the very first interview with Brendan on November 6th. The state's not going to tell you that, but that's the case. Everything that Brendan said was fed to him at some previous point, or it was known to him at some previous point. So that is a factor that the state fails to address in its briefs and in its arguments. Investigators asked the petitioner if the petitioner was there when this happened. Petitioner said no, so they asked whether the victim was dead when his uncle put her back in the car. Petitioner quickly answered yes, causing investigators to ask, "How do you know that?" Recognizing that he was caught in a lie, petitioner admitted, unexpectedly, that he had heard screaming coming from his uncle's trailer 2 hours earlier, but claimed he simply went home and watched TV until his uncle came and asked for him. Investigators challenged him again, explaining that it did not make sense for his uncle to ask petitioner to help him. he knew the petitioner knew something. The petitioner then acknowledged that he went into his uncle's trailer, so investigators asked where the victim was and if she was alive. In response, petitioner volunteered out of the blue that the victim was handcuffed to the bed. Handcuffed to the bed again. There's absolutely zero proof. She's talking about how the facts and how he was giving narrative and things that were damning evidence. This is not damning evidence. You can't prove that there was. They to this day cannot prove that she was in there, that these handcuffs were around the bedpost, that she was thrashing for her life there. They can't prove any of that. None of that can be proven. They can't prove that. And this is what this lawyer is trying to say here, is that this is why it proves that Brendan did it, because he said all these things that can't be proven. It's ridiculous. I mean, seriously. So he then described having a conversation with his uncle about how his uncle had raped her. Okay. Once again, fed by investigators. Petitioner's interview then took an even more surprising turn, with the petitioner confessing to participating directly in the brutal rape and murder. Once again, all of this was at the prodding of the detectives, because Brendan didn't understand what they were doing. He didn't understand that he just didn't understand what was going on. He was guessing at what he thought they wanted, and he didn't understand what they wanted because he didn't understand the situation. He wasn't there. The fact of the matter is that the first story that Brendan tells, and the story that he continually went back to every time he would reject these ridiculous confessions that they would coerce out of him, he would always go back to telling the one story, the same way, every time. And that is the story of really what happened with Brendan that day. It's unfortunate that Brendan got caught up in all this crap, and it's absolutely ridiculous, this statement that they're making here, because they're trying to say that the things he was saying were damning him, but like I said, you can't prove any of these things happened. You can't prove there was a rape. You can't prove that Teresa was even in that trailer. They can't even prove that. And she's trying to say that these facts that he offered are damning. I mean, come on. Get your head out of your Wisconsin. You're ridiculous. All right, so now we're going to see a few of the things that the state offers that are once again damning, apparently, to Brendan, which, yeah, it's silly. These things that they bring up are things like the key. Personally, if I was them, I would want to stay away from subjects like the key, because it's so obvious to 90% of people who watch that whole thing about the key. 90% of people go, oh yeah, that key's crap. Even Ken Kratz in his own closing argument tried to distance himself from the whole key situation by trying to tell the jury it didn't matter. So, I mean, what does that tell you? But they include this key as if it's something valid that they should have said, and it's ridiculous to me that they even put it in, but hey, it's their choice. So, they put a few things in here I thought were odd, so let's take a look. Oh, I just had to put this bit in so we could all have a little bit of a laugh here, folks. Petitioner volunteered that he and his uncle used a mechanic's creeper to carry the victim's body to the fire. The police found a creeper in the garage without any of Teresa's DNA on it. Not a hint. Not even Brendan's. Okay, anyway. Petitioner said that his uncle used a shovel and a rake to push around the fire. Okay, those would probably be items that were typically used when they were having a fire there. So for him to say that he was pushing something around with those items, is not very, that doesn't seem like much of a big deal to me. It doesn't seem to prove much of anything. Petitioner explained that his uncle got a scratch on his finger, and his uncle did in fact have a cut on his middle finger of his right hand. Okay, fair enough. That cut does exist. Whether he was actively bleeding that night is another question. Petitioner described cleaning up blood stains with paint thinner and bleach. Actually, he described cleaning up a red substance, a red oily substance. It's actually Fassbender that kind of, once again, asserts and fact feeds and basically tries to get Brendan to adjust his story and suggests that it was blood. Could it be blood? blood. You know, he just kept coming at Brendan going, was it blood? Could it be blood? Could it be blood? Until Brendan essentially acquiesced. That's the way this whole thing goes with Brendan. They try to act like Brendan came out with this stuff just all woo-woo, forthright, whatever. No, it was after it was painfully suggested and worked him over until he offered these things back out of his own volition. It's sad, but that's what's really happening. Anyway, it's Fassbender who asserts that it was blood. Brendan just says that it was like a red oily substance, most likely transmission fluid. So then they ask about the petitioner's blood-stained jeans. The petitioner told investigators that his uncle had placed the victim's car key in his dresser drawer. The police found the key in the bedroom. The key in the bedroom, yes. You know, the one that the aliens could have put there? Yeah. That key. The one that somehow popped out of the secret entrance to Narnia that was in Stephen's little bedside cabinet there. Colburn managed to shake it out of the Narnia there. So anyway, that key was not there. It's ridiculous. If you believe Kratz when he tells you that it was the first thorough search, that's again baloney, complete crap. Jerry Buting can recite to you basically, you know, like, you know, word for word, you know, where how much time investigators spent there previous to the day they found that key, and how much time they spent in each room. And they spent loads of time in all of the rooms. That bedroom was gone over very well before the night that Link and Colburn show up there with Kucharski, and suddenly, whoop, boom, there's a key. But everything on the cabinet, after being shaken supposedly, was all in its place, didn't move at all. The remote, the change, none of it moved. It was all just perfectly right where it was. Just the keys just there. Anyway, so just thought I'd share that with you guys. I thought that was hilarious that they actually had the cojones to throw in the key found by Colburn and Link. The state is bold indeed. All right, this segment's going to be what the Solicitor General for Wisconsin had to say about the dissenting opinions of Judges Wood, Rovner, and Williams. So, you know, of course, she doesn't agree with what those judges say. She actually, see, the funny thing to me is Judge Wood was very, very, she went to all the trouble of finding the sources of where Brendan got pieces of information. And this Solicitor General right here tries to say in her brief here that Judge Wood got all of her sources were from Kiss the Girls for what Brendan said and things that Brendan said, and that is absolutely not true. She cited other sources of things that Brendan said. She did not just cite Kiss the Girls. She may have cited Kiss the Girls once or twice or a few times, but I remember she was citing witness statements, testimony, things like that. I mean, trying to claim that all of her sources were from Kiss the Girls was a bold lie. So I'm going to show you that segment here. I will also post my video about the dissenting opinion of Judges Wood and Rovner. I will post the link to that down below in the info box below this video. So here we go. Now this is the state of Wisconsin to a T. In addition to the fact that I have yet to see any mention by the state of the fact feeding that took place. Okay, they are completely avoiding that like the plague. They are not mentioning that at all so far. And I'm a little over halfway through this thing, but so far no mention of the fact feeding. Only, well, here, look at what they say here as to where Chief Judge Wood was getting her information for her dissenting opinion. Chief Judge Wood and Judges Rovner and Williams dissented in two separate opinions for many of the same reasons, or many of the reasons given by the panel majority. Chief Judge Wood's dissent also included a chart that purported to show the petitioner was not relying on his own independent recollection in his confession, but the only source Chief Judge Wood identified for petitioner's account of his rape was his discredited reference to Kiss the Girl's book. Judge Rovner's dissent, in turn, argued at length that the courts should update their coercion doctrines in light of current social science research. Now, that is a completely untrue statement. Whenever the facts don't suit you, just lie, right? That's what the state of Wisconsin does. Chief Judge Wood cited many things besides Kiss the Girls when she was explaining how many of the statements that they say independently came from Brendan Dassey's independent recollection. She was showing many different sources as to why that was not true. So for this lawyer for the state of Wisconsin writing this to minimize Judge Wood in that way. Now we're going to listen to the Wisconsin Solicitor General tell us how there was no fact feeding. Yeah, that's amazing. But here we go. This is the attempt to try to say that Brendan wasn't fed most of the facts that he would spit back at the investigators. So, I mean, there's no level to the amount of moxie that they have there in Wisconsin. Well, we've got our first mention of fact feeding, about 5 pages from the end, page 30, and it's not, and basically it's trying to act as if the fact feeding is ridiculous, that it didn't happen apparently. So petitioner argues that investigators engaged in fact feeding, but cites no authority for the proposition that a few leading questions are coercive, even when dealing with minors. And those, it's more than just leading questions. They were actually giving him the information to spit out later. This, I mean, yeah, ridiculous. This is a total attempt at minimization of the fact feeding. It's ridiculous. So, anyways, confronting a suspect with what the police already know is often necessary technique when a suspect repeatedly lies. At most, the court has found that that confessions composed entirely of yes or no answers are more likely to be involuntary. Here, petitioner provided many of the most damning details himself in response to open-ended questions, as they keep claiming throughout this whole thing, and yet all they can offer is the screams of Teresa, the handcuffs, all these things that there is absolutely zero proof that Teresa is there. All they have, and they mention, is that bullet in the garage, and you all know that bullet in the garage is freaking beyond ridiculous. How it wasn't there when they jackhammered that crack. Okay, that bullet was not there when they jackhammered that crack. And it's obvious when you look at that bullet. So, yeah, this is what they're doing. They're trying to act like that these investigators weren't feeding the facts to Brendan. And by the way, folks, so far throughout this whole thing, they've been talking about Brendan resisted the wires that were hanging in the garage. He resisted this. He resisted. At no point in this brief are they mentioning the control question. Sounds like somebody got smart. Or at least it looks like somebody got smart. Whoever the lawyer that's handling this for the state saw that and saw the same thing I did and said, I'm not putting that in my opinion, or I'm not putting that in my brief. People are nuts. You guys are crazy if you think that says what you think it says, because it doesn't. Okay, now we're going to go to where this, Solicitor General for the state of Wisconsin is going to refute whether or not juveniles fully understand Miranda warnings and Miranda rights. Basically saying that the social science and all the research that's gone into this are bogus. It's untrue. It's absolutely, bogus in this Solicitor General for Wisconsin's opinion. I think it's ridiculous. I think that the research that's been done that was offered by the Amici for Brendan clearly states and shows that children repeatedly do not comprehend their rights, that they don't understand what it means. They don't understand. They generally don't, even when they're being told they could leave. Because officers are usually giving mixed messages, they oftentimes don't really feel like they could leave if they wanted. And so it's like this really weird, delicate dance that these kids don't understand. They don't get it. How could they? They don't have enough experience. I mean, some could, some might, if they've had some previous encounters with law enforcement, if their family has lots of encounters with law enforcement, possibly. But with Brendan, there is no previous engagement with law enforcement. He's never ever been in contact with them before, because he's never been in trouble. He's just not the type of person to do those type of things. So he had no experience, nothing to draw on to help him through that situation. That's the things that make juveniles vulnerable. I mean, the state can try to deny it all they want, but that's a fact. But here we go. We'll go into the state's denial that most juveniles don't understand their Miranda rights or warnings. Petitioner cites research allegedly showing that minors rarely fully comprehend Miranda rights. The petitioner testified at trial that he did, in fact, understand his Miranda rights. And he demonstrated his understanding by repeating investigators' warnings. In other words, repeating words. Okay. In his own words, right? Well, okay. How much different? How much in his own words was it? I mean, it's not like what the investigators were saying to him was terribly complicated. The words were just words, you have the right to remain silent. You can leave whenever you want. Sure, he hears these words. Does he understand them? Does he understand them and know that he can, does it, I mean, the question is, did he feel intimidated by these investigators? I think he did. There's a lot of factors that go into this, not just whether or not he could understand words, coming out of somebody's mouth. It's, did he understand how those words, when put together, what they meant? Did he fully comprehend it at the time? Even at his trial, was he capable of comprehending his Miranda rights or warnings? That's my question. Because he clearly thought he was going back to school. You can't deny it. He clearly thought he was going back to school. Okay? Somebody who understands their Miranda warnings and Miranda rights and then says all the things that he said knows that they're not going back to school. Hands down. Okay, in this next bit, the state essentially kind of acquiesces to the fact that current interrogation standard, operating protocol with juveniles could be flawed. They're acknowledging the possibility that it could be. And with that, they're suggesting that the Supreme Court actually needs to make new law in order to change that. And that trying to use Brendan Dassey's case to affect some of that change would be pointless or whatever. It's their point of view. But the main thing here is that they feel that basically this, if there is a problem with interrogations and juvenile interrogations that needs to be addressed, then it needs to be addressed in a different way and not with this case and all that. So what it all comes down to is what I was talking about earlier, where the state is basically going like, well, no, AEDPA says he should stay in prison. But if that's not enough, and you are actually moved by the argument of the petitioner and his lawyers and his amici, then the answer here is new law. Either one of those two options is what they're pushing for, because either one of those two options keeps Brendan in jail and keeps them from having to own up to their mistake. So we're going to move into this document now, and we'll come back one more time. So this is the part where the state kind of acquiesces to the fact that there may be issues that need to be addressed regarding juvenile interrogations, but that this is the improper vessel in which to judge it because it's on AEDPA review or whatnot. But just kind of listen to this here for a second. This court may someday adopt the restrictive approach to juvenile confessions that petitioner and his amici favor, concluding that the cost in the terms of justice that troubled Judge Hamilton is worth imposing because juvenile interrogations are inherently coercive, absent truly extraordinary precautions. So, and that's true, and that's why special care has been mandated so many times by the Supreme Court, why it's been said so many times, why it's really that so important. And it's the thing that's odd here to me is I see the state making this argument is it basically comes down to either you deny it because there's not enough evidence to say that the appellate court's fact finding was unreasonable, essentially, or you need to make new law regarding juvenile interrogations, in which case that doesn't help Brendan, so that we don't have to own up to the mistake we made by coercing a confession out of this young boy when he was 16 years old. That's what this screams to me when I read it. So that was our basic coverage there for the state of Wisconsin's response brief to Brendan's petition for a writ of certiorari with the Supreme Court of the United States. So we've just gone over the state's response and seen what they are thinking and what they're, well, not that it's changed much. I mean, but I will say, I am very, very fascinated by the fact that nobody mentioned the control question this time. I mean, they were also convinced it was damning before, but suddenly they're not. So convinced enough that it wasn't added to this brief. Now, they were talking about other things that usually accompanied the control question. They were talking about the wires hanging in the garage that he was resisting. They were talking about numerous other things. Usually when they talk about him resisting, they throw in the control question. Wasn't here today. So it wasn't here in this brief. Thought that was interesting. So that's going to wrap it up for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back with more calls with more of Stephen and Brendan's supporters here coming up in the future. Working on a big one right now with somebody special, somebody who's been a real monster researcher in this case, and somebody who I've been wanting to talk to kind of in a call for a long time. So that's coming up. Won't say the name just yet. I'll leave that as a surprise. But anyways, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.